This video picks up on what in my copy is page 38 of A Doll's House, and it's where Torvald has just left Nora to practice her dancing, and at that very moment the doorbell rings and we see the return of Dr. Rank. Now, if you recall, before the previous conversation with Torvald, Nora was having this quite passionate discussion with Mrs. Lind, and we were just starting to learn something about the true nature of her relationship with Dr. Rank. That was never resolved, and so going into this conversation now, there is a certain element of tension, I think, between what our fears are for the real nature of their relationship, or the direction that their relationship might go, and what's actually going on here. So it's going to be quite a tricky scene for us. So the doorbell rings and she cries out, "Dr. Rank," expecting, of course, that because of what Torvald said. And she says, "Dr. Rank, anything rather than that, anything, whatever it is." And she puts her hands over her face, pulls herself together, goes to the door and opens it. Rank is standing outside, hanging up his coat. During the following dialogue, it begins to grow dark. We talked at the end of the very previous scene about the ambiguity about what exactly it was that Nora was most afraid of. And I think that's continued here when she's talking about anything rather than that. What is this anything? What is that? We're really not sure, and we get a sense of the frenzy that she is feeling. It's worth noting the fact that it begins to grow dark. I think scenically, in pathetic fallacy terms, symbolically, that's going to be interesting. We'll talk more about what it might symbolise later on in this extract, but nonetheless it is going to be important. "Good afternoon, Dr. Rank," she says. "I knew your ring, but you mustn't go into Torvald now. I think he is busy with something." See there how she directly defies that instruction of Torvald, which was previously to send Dr. Rank in. We, as a suspicious reader, might think that she has an ulterior motive for doing this. What that might be, we'll continue to think. Dr. Rank says to her, "And you?" And she brings him in and shuts the door after him. That's interesting, isn't it? That we want to be private with him. Why might that be? Again, we'll find out. But after our conversation with Mrs. Lind, we have some perhaps suspicions about what it might be. She says then, "Oh, you know very well I always have time for you." "Thank you. I shall make use of it as much as I can." "What do you mean by that? As much of it as you can?" "Well, does that alarm you?" It was such a strange way of putting it. Is anything likely to happen? And you can see how this whole scene could be played quite ambiguously in terms of what the undercurrents might be. Could it be sexual? Could it be adulterous? Could it be childlike? Depends rather how you want to play it, but we'll see in a moment why Dr. Rank has behaved strangely. And he says nothing but what I have long been prepared for, but I certainly didn't expect it to happen so soon. Again, is it love? We don't know. It's ambiguous. Nora grips him by the arm. "What have you found out, Dr. Rank? You must tell me." He sits down by the stove. "It is all up with me, and it can't be helped." To say it's all up means essentially that you've reached the end of the road. You've got nothing else to do. Usually referring to sort of death or dying, but it can mean generally a hopeless situation. But see Nora's response, a sigh of relief. "Is it about yourself?" In other words, her assumption, call it egotistical, call it brought about by desperation, as you will, she assumed that it was all up, with her. It was something about her that he'd come to see her about. Dr. Rank, not quite understanding, says, "Who else? It's no use lying to oneself. I am the most wretched of all my patients, Mrs. Helmer. Lately I have been taking stock of my internal economy, i.e. his health, bankrupt. Probably within a month I shall lie rotting in the churchyard." Now, if you recall, I think we may have mentioned previously, Dr. Rank is suffering, or it's implied that he is suffering from a condition known as hereditary syphilis. That is to say, from a terminal sexually transmitted infection, which he was passed down to him via his parents, which was possible in pre-antibiotic times. And it was possible that you could infect your children with it if you had it, and that they would die, and that's the implication here. And Nora, not terribly sympathetically, but rather selfishly, says, "What an ugly thing to say." Rank replies, "The thing itself is cursedly ugly, and the worst of it is that I shall have to face so much more that is ugly before that. I shall only make one more examination of myself. When I have done that, I shall know pretty certainly when it will be that the horrors of dissolution will begin." As in dissolution, as in his final decline to die. "There is something I want to tell you. Helmer's refined nature gives him an unconquerable disgust of everything that is ugly. I won't have him in my sick room." "Oh, but Dr. Rank—" "I won't have him there. Not on any account. I bar my door to him. As soon as I am quite certain that the worst has come, I shall send you my card with a black cross on it, and then you will know that the loathsome end has begun." Now, few things then that are worth noting here. First of all, there's an indication that although Rank is nominally Helmer's friend, on this level at least, it seems like he's closer to Nora. Nora is the person who wants to attend him when he is on his deathbed. That's interesting. Another quotation, if we go back slightly to that previous longer speech, when he says how Helmer's refined nature gives him an unconquerable disgust at everything that is ugly, I think we can link that to the way, to Helmer's attitudes towards anything that scars reputation as well. In other words, this ugliness doesn't have to be physical ugliness, but, if you like, reputational ugliness, damage to reputation. I think that's an interesting idea. We can see his physical repugnance as a metaphor for his repugnance at moral or reputational problems. Anyhow, we will continue, and Nora continues. How forgivably this is, I'll leave to you to decide, but rather to be a bit trivial, and says, "You are quite absurd today, and I wanted you so much to be in a really good humour. With death stalking beside me, to have to pay this penalty for another man's sin," i.e. his father's presumably catching the disease. "Is there any justice in that? And in every single family, in one way or another, some such inexorable retribution is being exacted." Now, before we think about anything else, in that single quotation, I suppose you could kind of sum up Ibsen's purpose for this play. We've talked about how it's very much about revealing the cracks in these middle-class facades, in these dolls' houses, if you will. But isn't that a good quotation? In every single family, in one way or another. In other words, there is no such thing as the perfect society, but only all these illusions. I mean, you could actually, I suppose, in a way, make some quite interesting parallels to, the modern social media era, and talk about the gulf between the perfection of someone's, image, someone's online offering, and the reality behind it. I suppose you could see that as being a kind of analogy for reputation, and the importance of reputation with your social media facade representing your reputation. You could see that as being quite interestingly linked, and there could be potentially an interesting link there. When it comes to this coursework, if anybody could find, I don't know whether there is a modern novel that looks at that sort of social media aspect, if there's anything that did that in a fairly meaningful way, looked at the importance of that. Anyway, nonetheless, I digress, and I should move on. So Nora puts her hands over her ears and says, "Rubbish, do talk about something cheerful." He says, "Oh, it's a mere laughing matter, the whole thing. My poor innocent spine has to suffer for my father's youthful amusements," referring to one of the areas of damage caused, I think, by the disease. And it's odd, because Nora's lack of sympathy here, you could actually, potentially, play as playfulness, as in she is deliberately acting childishly in such a way as to cheer him up. You could play it that way, but I think it could also be seen as a general lack of sympathy. Anyhow, it goes on, and he says, "Oh, it's a mere laughing matter, the whole thing. My poor innocent Rhine had suffered my father's youthful amusements." The implication being sex, but again, either playfully or naively, depending on how you choose to play it. Nora misunderstands him, or perhaps willfully pretends to misunderstand him, to tease him and says, "I suppose you mean he was too partial to asparagus and pâté de foie gras, don't you?" Meaning sort of symbolic of fine living. And he's, "Yes, and to truffles. Truffles, yes. And oysters too, I suppose?" Oysters, of course, that goes without saying. Of course, worth noting, things like oysters. Obviously, perhaps there is that association as a kind of aphrodisiac, something which associated with kind of seduction in that sense. It goes on and says, "And heaps of port and champagne. It is sad that all these nice things should take their revenge on our bones, especially that they should revenge themselves on the unlucky bones of those who have not had the satisfaction of enjoying them." Now, I suppose what we can potentially see here, it's possible, for example, that Dr. Rank, knowing that he was diseased, it's possible that he has responsibly refrained from indulging in, for example, sexual activity with other people for fear of transmitting it to them. So it's possible that that might be what he's talking about there. However, if we view the strange nature of his relationship with Nora, we can also see that as being a slightly flirtatious hint. This idea that he's not had the satisfaction of enjoying them, perhaps he's trying to imply something. But Nora replies in quite a deadpan way and says, "Yes, that's the saddest part of it all." And Rank, clearly trying to understand how she's taking this, says, it gives her a searching look and a says that there's a short pause, and then the implication, "Why did you smile?" And I think perhaps what we can argue here is that he is perhaps trying to see, is she offering herself? He's trying to understand whether she's feels sympathy for him, that much sympathy, and whether that sympathy might translate into anything more, I think. But then I think presumably he perhaps realises that that is not the case. Rank says, "No, it was you that laughed." To which Nora replies, "No, it was you that smiled, Dr. Rank." And he rises and says, "You're a greater rascal than I thought." Again, we can play this playfully. We can play that the whole conversation is a great joke between them. On the other hand, we can sort of play it that we could play it that Nora is really rather selfish and unsympathetic, and he's disappointed by the response that that he gets from her. She says, "I am in a silly mood today." "And so it seems," he replies. Nora puts her hand on his shoulders, and so I suppose then here, whether this is the confirmation that it was playful all along, whether perhaps she feels remorse for having been harsher to him a moment ago, but she puts her hand on his shoulders in what is really quite a touchingly intimate gesture, and says, "Dear, dear Dr. Rank, death mustn't take you away from Torvald and me. It is a loss you would easily recover from. Those who are gone are soon forgotten." Nora looked at him anxiously. "Do you believe that? People form new ties, and then—" "Who will form new ties?" "Both you and Helmer when I am gone. Now, let's just hold it there for a second. Those who are gone are soon forgotten." Nora sees a kind of resonance here in her own fate, because she's already thinking, after the conversations with Torvald at the end of Act 1 and previously, she's already thinking about what the family would look like in her absence, and what her own life might look like in this absence. And therefore, I think she's clearly thinking about, she sees how this reflects on herself. We could see this as a sign of her self-obsession, but on the other hand, it could simply be a reflection of her desperation, that she sees everything as it reflects to her own life. "So, both you and Helmer when I am gone. You yourself are already on the high road to it, I think. What did that Mrs. Lynde want here last night?" The implication being that he thinks that Mrs. Lynde will be a new friend for Nora just as he leaves. In the use of that pronoun, that Mrs. Lynde, there's a certain distancing there, as if in some sense he doesn't approve of her. Perhaps she was a little bit snobbish, who knows? Nora replies, "Oh ho, you don't mean to say you are jealous of poor Christine?" "Yes, I am. She will be my successor in this house. When I am done for, this woman will... Hush, don't speak so loud. She's still in that room. Today again. There, you see. And again, is Dr. Rank perhaps here? Is he being playful? Is he being gloomy? Is he being slightly vindictive with Nora? It's difficult to see how you would play that. It's open to all those interpretations, and I think it's going to look to you to decide where your own view on that actually sits. Nora continues then. She has only come to sew my dress for me. Good gracious, how unreasonable you are. And she sits down on the sofa. Be nice now, Dr. Rank, and tomorrow you'll see how beautifully I shall dance, and you can imagine I am doing it all for you. And for Torvald, of course. Now, think about that. It's, on some levels, he's responding to the implication of his at the end of the previous page about not having enjoyed the same pleasures as his father. And it's very strange. Is this sympathetic? Is this a kind woman who's offering him as much as he can? You know, look but don't touch. Is there something a little bit more shifty than that at stake? It's difficult to tell. And the way that she pauses and then at the end of the sentence tags on that phrase, and for Torvald too, very, very strange. Is this simply her being a kind and generous, open-hearted woman and then thinking about her husband? Is this somebody who's entertaining thoughts of adultery? Is this somebody who's morally compromised? She's a very complex character, and it's very difficult for us to weigh up the actual reality of it. So it says that she takes various things out of the box. Dr. Rank, come and sit down here, and I will show you something. Rank sits down. What is it? Nora says, just look at those. And Rank replies, silk stockings. Flesh-coloured. Aren't they lovely? It is so dark here now, but tomorrow... No, 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 you must only look at the feet. Oh, well, you may have permission to look at the legs, too. Why are you looking so critical? Don't you think they will fit me? Which I think presumably is a Victorian equivalent of does my bum look big in this? But that is tremendously flirtatious. I think even now that would be something that's tremendously flirtatious. Although it's worth pointing out that at this time tights hadn't been invented, so stockings would be the norm rather than a kind of luxury item. But nonetheless, they remain an intimate item of lingerie, and certainly not something that you would expect any reputable woman to be showing to anybody, however much a friend of the family they might be. I mean, barely even to her own husband, never mind to another. What is this? Is this sympathy? Is this taunting? Again, it's so difficult to weigh up Nora's motives. Obviously, she's not wearing the stockings. The promise, if you like, is that he'll see her in them tomorrow, but it's still a deeply strange scene. Rank then continues on and says, in response to Nora's question, I have no means of forming an opinion about that. She looks at him for a moment and says, shame on you, and hits him lightly on the ear with the stockings. That's to punish you, and folds them up again. Now again, there's a sort of strange dynamic here, isn't there? Partly playful, partly childlike, partly sexual. I mean, you could almost, if you're going to be very critical, argue that there's something of the sort of child exploring her sexuality, you know, in naivety here, that she's only half aware, perhaps, of the significance of what she's doing. Very difficult situation for someone like Dr. Rank, knowing, of course, that whatever he might want to do, he can't act upon any physical instincts. Anyhow, it continues on, and he says, and what other nice things am I to be allowed to see? So continuing on then with the sort of the rather flirtatious, rather playful tone here. And she replies, not a single thing more for being so naughty. And she looks among the things, humming to herself. Very, again, really more of the same thing. There's a short silence, and he says, when I am sitting here talking to you as intimately as this, I cannot imagine for a moment what would have become of me if I had never come in to this house. And he smiles and says, I believe you do feel thoroughly at home with us. At home enough to look at her stockings, clearly. But Rank, in a lower voice, then looks straight in front of him and says, and to have to leave it all, thinking forward, of course, to his own death. And she says, "Nonsense, you are not going to leave it." And as before, he continues on and says, "And not to be able to leave behind one the slightest token of one's gratitude, barely a fleeting regret even, nothing but an empty place which the first comer can fill as well as any other." And you can see how that might set Nora's mind whirring, thinking, could she ask him to leave something to be remembered by? Could he be the solution to her financial problems? Could he be the solution to paying off this loan? It's worth noting, by the way, two things. We mentioned at the start of this scene, or the start of this section, about how it would grow dark during this speech, and that was touched on the previous page. On the one hand, I think we can see that as being symbolic perhaps of Rank's own life, but the idea of being together in this sort of darkening room is a very intimate thing. Of being together almost in the darkness is a very intimate thing again. Is this something that's happened before? It's difficult to say. Is Nora motivated by the thought that she might be able to get something out of Dr. Rank? It's difficult to say. Had she had that idea previously, or was it something that was inadvertently suggested to her by Mrs. Lind? We don't know. Nonetheless, it continues on. In response to his suggestion, Nora says, "And if I asked you now for a..." No. And once again, see the ambiguity, the unspoken nature of this. We're still not sure what exactly it is that she wants from him. I mean, the implication is that it's money, but we don't know. He says, "For what? For a big proof of your friendship?" Yes. I mean, a tremendously big favour. Would you really make me so happy for once?" "Ah, but you don't know what it is yet." "No, but tell me." And I think it's perfectly possible that we might interpret this as him thinking that she's going to ask him something that's going to be to his advantage. Of course, we're thinking it's very likely she's thinking about money. Nora then goes on and says, "I really can't, Dr. Rank. It is something out of all reason. It means advice and help and a favour." And he says, "The bigger a thing it is, the better. I can't conceive what it is you mean. Do tell me. Haven't I your confidence? As in, don't you trust me?" And I suppose maybe in a sense, perhaps what we're forgetting here is that the sort of sexual thing here will always remain an undertone, something that is unsaid. And it's much less likely that that would have been the first thing that would be meant or that would be interpreted by an audience at the time. But nonetheless, it does remain a definite undertone, and one which only grows for a modern audience like ourselves today. So, it goes on, and Nora says, "More than anyone else, I know you are my truest and best friend, and so I will tell you what it is. Well, Dr. Rank, it is something you must help me to prevent. You know how devotedly, how inexpressibly deeply Torvald loves me. He would never for a moment hesitate to give his life for me." Now, again, we know that there's an irony here, because we know that if it came to something like reputation, actually he probably would. But nonetheless, she's protesting the closeness that she has there. Rank leans towards her and makes a kind of confession as he says, "Nora, do you think he is the only one?" In other words, the implication that he loves her too. And Nora, it says, with a slight start, a surprise, says, "The only one?" As if, again, if we're talking about Nora as being naive, or even if we're talking about her as being purely manipulative, the idea that perhaps supports the idea that she might be surprised when Dr. Rank is now acting on these hints. Perhaps they have been inadvertent that she's been given. Because Rank replies, "The only one who would gladly give his life for your sake." And we get a sense that almost there's a love triangle then now, isn't there? You know, that he loves her perhaps in his way just as much or more as Torvald. And Nora is sad to hear this when she says, "Is that it?" As if perhaps she was hoping that something more advantageous or financial might in fact be promised. And Rank says, "I was determined you should know it before I went away, and there will never be a better opportunity than this. Now you know it, Nora, and now you know too that you can trust me as you would trust no one else." Now, having done all this, having showed him a stocking, having had these conversations about what good friends they are, Nora now rises deliberately and quietly. In other words, she breaks the spell of the two of them sitting together on the sofa and says, "Let me pass." Rank makes room for her to pass him, but sits still. "Nora!" Nora gets to the hall door and says, "Helen, bring in the lamp." And she goes over to the stove. A few things worth noting. By bringing in the lamp, once again, you can link that with the idea of her rising from the settee, in the sense that the spell now is broken. She wants to bring light and honesty into this scene, and the previous intimacy is gone. When she goes over to the stoves, like fireplaces, being symbols of the family and the heart of the home and togetherness, in a sense we can see then that she's moving away from whatever flirtation that she might have had and back towards loyalty to her husband. And having behaved as she has done, she's now rather harsh. Well, again, I view it as harsh. You could still see it as playful, but I think it's increasingly difficult to do so. And she says, "Dear Dr. Rank, that was really horrid of you. To have loved you as much as anyone else does, was that horrid? No, but to go and tell me so, there was really no need. What do you mean? Did you know?" And the maid enters with a lamp, puts it down on the table, and goes out. "Nora, Mrs. Helmer, tell me, had you any idea of this?" And she says, "Oh, how do I know whether I had or whether I hadn't? I really can't tell you. To think you could be so clumsy, Dr. Rank. We were getting on so nicely." Strange, isn't it? Perhaps it is naivety. Perhaps that's what we're looking at here. But we would sort of look at this and think, having led him on so far, it seems a bit unfair, the poor man, that she's now turning around and blaming him for having dared to voice his feelings. And I mean, it must have been a brave act, I suppose, to tell someone's wife your feelings for them while their husband is in the other room. It's a really sort of sad scene. Dr. Rank condemned to death, and his attempts to set his matters right with the world are not going very well so far. We go on, and Rank says, "Well, at all events, you know now that you can command me body and soul. So won't you speak out?" Nora looks at him and says, "After what happened? I beg you to let me know what it is. I can't tell you anything now." And it's strange, because while now Nora knows what Dr. Rank's true meaning and true feelings are, she feels like she can't exploit them, which I suppose actually is to her credit, I think. But then what does it imply? That maybe while she thought that she could exploit her sexuality with him with no strings attached, that would have been somehow more acceptable? Difficult to say. Again, as we said before, difficult to weigh all these matters up. But Rank goes on and says, yes, you mustn't punish me in that way. Let me have permission to do for you whatever a man may do. Let's not interrogate what that statement might imply. I think, hopefully, he's talking in terms of generosity, but nonetheless. Nora says, "You can do nothing for me now. Besides, I really don't need any help at all. You'll find the whole thing is merely fancy on my part. It really is so. Of course it is." And she sits down on the rocking chair and looks at him with a smile. "You're a nice sort of man, Dr. Rank. Don't you feel ashamed of yourself now the lamp has come?" And see how she draws attention to the symbolic significance of that lamp. It's hard, actually, in a sense. It's almost her chance to belittle someone and to talk to them in a rather childlike way. And Rank says, "Not a bit, but perhaps I had better go." "Forever?" "No, indeed, you shall not. Of course you must come here just as before. You know very well Torvald can't do without you." "Yes, but you?" "Oh, I am always tremendously pleased when you come." "It is just that put me on the wrong track. You are a riddle to me. I have often thought that you would almost as soon be in my company as in Helmer's." And again, I suppose, we see, if we're thinking about Nora and her kind of naivety or her thoughtlessness, whichever way you look at it, we see the kind of unintended consequences of it, that she's obviously sent out signals that poor Dr. that poor Dr. Rank has clearly misinterpreted. Nora goes on and says, "Yes, you see, there are some people one loves best, and others whom one would almost always rather have as companions." In other words, poor Dr. Rank has been friend-zoned. But Rank goes on and says, yes, there is something in that. When I was at home, of course I loved Father best, but I always thought it was tremendous fun if I could steal down into the maid's room, because they never moralised at all, and talked to each other about such entertaining things. Rank says, I see. It is their place I have taken, as companions, not as someone really close. And she jumps up and goes to him, and says, oh dear nice Dr. Rank, I never meant that at all, but surely you can understand that being with Torvald is a little like being with Father. The maid enters now from the hall. It's worth mentioning, of course, if we think about the old patriarchal thing about, a girl being the father's until she is transferred to the husband's as sort of a almost as a kind of a goods or a property, kind of alludes to that idea there. Anyhow, the maid comes in and once again sort of breaks the spell, whispers and hands Nora a card. Nora glances at the card, says, oh, and put it in her pocket. In this context, it's a visiting card, so it would have someone's name on it that you would leave if you were calling at the house and they weren't in, or if you wanted to sort of communicate to somebody. Anyhow, he says, is there anything wrong? And she says, no, not in the least. It is only something. It is my new dress. She's clearly a lie because Mrs. Lind is dealing with the dress next door. Rank says, what? Your dress is lying there. Oh yes, that one, but this is another. I ordered it. Torvald mustn't know about it. Oh, then that was the great secret. Of course, do go into him. He's sitting in the inner room. Keep him as long as... Don't worry, I won't let him escape. And he goes into Helma's room. Now, there is a couple of things then that we just need to briefly unpick there. First of all, we know, don't we, that it isn't another dress, because we know that Nora has not been spending the money that she gets from Torvald on herself. She has instead been spending it on loan repayments. So we know that that's a lie, with dramatic irony from previously. Of course, the implication might be that it's going to be Krogstad who is actually trying to get in contact with her. Isn't it interesting, though, that as soon as Nora mentions about the dress, and Rank says then that was the great secret, and so in a way we're right back to where we were at the start of the play, where everyone thinks that Nora is this sort of superficial, rather airheaded character, and that this great secret that she was fussing about for this whole scene is something as insignificant as a dress. But it's patronising that they might think that that's the case, but nonetheless that is how it is. And once again, Nora finally escapes from this situation with this air of playfulness. That brings us then to the end of this section, and in a moment, in the next scene, in the following video, we'll be looking at what happens when Nora speaks with Krogstad again. And that concludes this video.